Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly 90-minute deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
My name is Lisa. I'm a clinical psychologist and a college counselor. I am a parent of a boy in elementary school, a girl in middle school, and a girl in college. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University.
This week in the news, did Columbia game the U.S. News ranking with sketchy data? A great article by Jordan Ellenberg of the Washington Post. Our question from a listener is, Lisa, what are your thoughts about the recent article in the Atlantic magazine entitled, Why Are Teens So Sad? That is part 1 of 2. Our interview is with Roger Parrott, the president of Belhaven University in Jackson, Mississippi, on what are the major trends impacting higher education? That's part 1. And our college spotlight is the University of Illinois of Chicago, otherwise known as UIC. That is part 1 of 2.
Hey, my friend, how's it going, man? What's new,
It's going
dude?
great. I know Chicago's starting to catch up to Atlanta weather here. We hit our first 80 degrees yesterday.
Hey, finally, after snow like in April.
That's right. Snow in April. And then 80s, and that's what we love about the Midwestern winters. They just can't decide whether they'll ever be spring.
You can have it. Last time I talked to Dave, I'm in a text message group with Dave and my brother Norm. We talk about politics and issues and stuff. They were bullying me over movies, ripping on me over Julia Andrews and Julia Roberts and all these people.
You didn't know what the Sound of Music is.
No, I knew what it was. I hadn't seen it. My wife's seen it. My daughter's seen it.
Then I say it's Julia Andrews. He says, oh, yes, I've seen Julia Roberts in The Pelican Brief. I'm like, just two different people, like 30 years apart.
Not claiming to be a movie expert. All right, let's switch to college admissions.
Not all Julias look alike.
Hey, Julia Roberts is from Smyrna, Georgia. It's like home turf. I like her. I've seen 3 of her movies, so I was bragging. I thought it was impressive that I've seen 3 of her movies.
Yeah, Julia Roberts, Julia Andrews, they're all the same.
Sure. Let's talk college admission. So, few announcements. Big announcement. And actually, I'm gonna read this one, or just read a little bit about it. So it says, students looking to attend UNC Chapel Hill, North Carolina State University, or any other UNC system school won't have to submit SAT or ACT scores with their applications through fall of 2024. Now, this is significant for a number of reasons. One, we've got this battle going on. Our test scores coming back. Is the new computerized SAT going to draw people back in? If you follow the national landscape, the most overwhelming majority of private schools have gone test optional, and there's no indication that all that's changing. MIT is a complete outlier. In fact, there's a great article out right now I put up on Twitter about why MIT is an outlier. Don't expect many to follow. So then it comes down to the public schools, and you've got the West Coast schools. Pretty much all of them are either test blind or test optional. And then you see similar trends in the Midwest. That movement is growing strong, and in the Northeast. So a lot of it has been, the South. The South is the one that's going to restore test scores, because Florida never, ever went test optional in the middle of the pandemic. Georgia clearly wants to go back to scores. They tried it and reversed their decision. So you're looking at these big schools in the South. So for the North Carolina system to say we're test optional through 2024 is pretty significant. And what's maybe even more significant is the reason. I'm going to read the quote, because you keep hearing, we're doing it because of COVID, right? Look at this reason. The reasoning behind keeping the waiver now is to stay competitive with peer institutions that have either adopted this type of policy or dropped standardized testing requirements. In other words, now we're at such a critical mass that we would be at such a competitive disadvantage that it's just not worth doing it and causing our schools to get less applications. So, interesting announcement, development worth following. Second, a lot is happening with the anti-legacy admissions movement. That is picking up steam and picking it up fast. So keep an eye on that. Expect some more announcements to come in 2022 and 2023 in regard for that. Now, I had promised an update on our new transition. For those of you who haven't heard, the last couple weeks, my brother from another mother will be transitioning to once a month from weekly when Lauren gets back to school, just so that he can juggle the many balls he's got going on in his life, man. And we got to get you off that graveyard shift and working so many nights and trying to buy up all of Chicago. Then maybe you can have a life. But so I promised an update, and I'm going to dribble this out over the next few weeks because we're still looking to nail down the details. But here's what I'll say. So, and I'm going to be completely transparent with you guys. We owe this to you. So when we first started Your College Bound Kid, you know, those of you who listen all the way back know this. It was like Anika and I, the two of us together. And the idea was she's the parent, she's the mom, and I'm the college expert. And the two of us would talk, a conversation between a parent and a college expert. And that was great. It worked well. We got a good response. Love it. Wouldn't change anything. And then we had, you know, a section in there after Anika. We brought in Dave. So now we have a mom and a dad, you know, and then Lisa, a mom, a dad, and another parent who's also a psychologist and a college counselor. But the idea is most of the segments, I've kind of been the expert. Like the question, the news article, Dave reads it, and I'm kind of the expert. The question from a listener, I'm kind of the expert. And then we do have our thought leader. We do have our interview. We do have an expert there. So what I want to do in this segment is move it more to an expert talking to another expert. And some of these other experts are going to be more knowledgeable than me, and that's great. So it's going to be a very high-level conversation with another college admission expert. Friends, I'm extremely uncomfortable using the word expert, especially referring to myself that way. Kind of smacks of hubris. But I just couldn't think of a better word to convey someone who's very knowledgeable and has a lot of experience. The truth is, no one arrives in this work. I learn something every single day from my students and parents and from college admission officers. So just know, expert does not mean you know everything, because you don't. Now, how's it going to work? Well, we're going to have between 3 to 5 people in a rotation doing around once a month. It's not going to be precise. Some may do 8, some may do 10, but it's going to be 3 to 5 in a rotation. I don't want too many people because I want you to get to know the individuals. And what am I looking for in who will be on here? Well, interesting. I love to have people that have been on both sides of the desk. That is, they've done admissions and they've done placement, because I feel you really understand admissions at a deeper level when you've had both experiences. So maybe to be someone that's done admissions and they've been an independent education consultant, or they've done admissions and they worked at a CBO, or then admissions and they've been a school-based counselor. Now, open to the idea that somebody has only done admissions and only done placement, but if that's the case, they got to have a ton of experience. Like I'm talking 2 decades, lots and lots of experience. So the idea is a lot of expertise, people from different perspectives. And then another thing is, and I'm going to share a quick story about this. Chemistry matters. So when we first started the podcast, I'll never forget, a friend of mine in Pennsylvania said, "I love your podcast." I was like, "Thank you." And then they said, I couldn't care less about college admissions. I just love the chemistry that you and Anika have. And I remember being gobsmacked. I was like, "You don't care about the content? You just like the chemistry?" And I didn't know whether that was an insult or a compliment. But over time, I took it as a compliment. And I came to realize that how important chemistry is. And we constantly hear, love the chemistry that you and Dave have, love the chemistry that you and Lisa have. You guys might have knockdown dragouts, but it's obvious that you like each other. So I am looking for people for whom I have great chemistry. These are people who, when I'm in a jam, I don't understand something about college admissions, these are the people that I call, that I bounce ideas off. Many of them, I'll be honest with you, a little hint, have already been on this podcast, many times in a role as thought leader expert in an interview. But we'll roll out more over time who they are. And then the last thing I want to say, and this one may be very transparent, I also have the idea that sometimes it will actually be an actual college admission officer talking about the issues. But I literally haven't even asked anybody about that yet. And about 3 to 4 times a year, we do want to have a student on to get a student perspective. So that's where we're going with it. We'll have names in the future, but hopefully that helps let you know where we're going as of June 1st.
Awesome.
All right, admission tip. Now, I promised that I was going to have a tip about the essay, but I keep thinking of all these other things that I want to talk about. So what you're going to do is get multiple tips today. The first one is about the essay, and the tip is hook 'em. What does hook 'em mean? That first sentence is extremely important in a personal statement. These are not robots. These are people that read many times 2,000 files a year. Their mind will get bored super fast if you start out boring. So you've got first sentence, sometimes I'll say first and second sentence to grab them in and make it interesting. I always say this. If I was in my office and I was reading an essay and I just read the first sentence, or I'll even say the first sentence, first and second sentence. If my boss called me and, Mark, I need to talk to you right now. If I was like, oh, shucks, I don't want to leave. This thing's interesting. That's the standard. Like a thrilling movie that's at the suspense point and you got to leave it. You got to hook them and you got to hook them fast. So that's the quick essay tip. But I got multiple tips. I got a couple other tips today because I'm thinking about all the people that haven't made decisions. I have to shout out Shelly, who's a mom in Southern California who I'm working with. She gave me this. I always say I learn from my students. She said, you know what's really helping me, Mark, and our daughter? She said, we've been getting our hands on yearbooks, college yearbooks, and we're finding them online a lot of times as well. And it's amazing what you see in that college yearbook. So that's a fantastic tip. You know, I've always advocated for newspapers, op-ed sections of newspapers, alumni magazines, looking at the posters. That's another tip. When you're on a tour, look for the posters, look for the signs, the opinion boards, and everything that's up there about the school. But shout out to Shelly for giving me what I think is a fantastic tip for all of you guys. Check out the yearbooks. Any thoughts, Dave?
I think that's excellent. Yearbooks is a great source of information because when those people are about to leave the school, they're completely unfiltered with their comments.
Yeah, and anytime you get unfiltered, right? That's why I love newspapers. That's why I love these. Like NC State has this section where everybody just writes all their opinions all over the graffiti wall. Like any time you get unfiltered, that's what you want.
That's right.
All right, so Dave is liberated from vernacular, and he'd be in trouble with this one because the word is TE, and I know what he would say. Is that a tight end in football, TE? No.
Tight end, yes. I think that's a good way that you can get that in with the admissions because, many times in admissions, you're looking for that particular person who will fit that position, and you just need that tight end who can both block and tackle and make that midfield catch. So, just like the bassoonist in the orchestra, you want the tight end. I like that. I got that one.
Sure. I'd love to be on the other end of Frida talking to you about all the nonsense that you spew. I can just see that conversation. For those you don't know Dave's wife, which is everybody, she's very blunt and very direct. she can strip Dave down with the best of them if his ego gets a little big. She knows how to just take that balloon and just pop that bubble.
That's what happens when you marry a cardiac anesthesiologist. They're very precise.
Yeah. They're used to doing cardiac anesthesiology on your brain. But
that's right. ER docs, we just wing it.
I
we
love
don't
it.
measure nothing. They go to the micrometer.
So let me break down TE. So very common. This is one you hear admission officers talking amongst themselves saying, let's look at the TE. What does the TE say? The TE refers to the transcript evaluation. Transcript evaluation, TE, and that's extremely important. And a little shorthand for transcript evaluation. Who wants to say transcript evaluation all the time? Just get TE in there. All right, our big number, 29 million. And that refers to 29 million unique impressions is how much U.S. News World Rankings gets in 1 year. And I have to say I'm very disappointed with how many of my students who are down to 2 schools come back to me and say, well, the rankings say this is better. And I always want to say, rankings for whom? In my book, 171 Answers, I put it this way. How would you feel if someone came up to you and said, why are you dating Jackie? We ranked her 87th, most beautiful girl in the school. Don't you know Barbara, who we ranked 16th, is interested in you? Why aren't you dating her? And you'd look at that person like they have 3 heads. You'd be like, because Jackie's beautiful to me, and we're compatible. And who are you to tell me the girl that I like is number 87? So as preposterous as that sounds, that's exactly what people do with their rankings, especially the cumulative rankings. I'm not talking about like rankings in engineering or ranking in business. That has some subjectivity, but I'm a lot more comfortable with that. But overall cumulative rankings, for example, American University, to say it's whatever it is. What if you're interested in international relations? Well, absolute top programs in the world. So don't tell me it's number whatever it is, 100 of this. It's ridiculous. And that's a perfect segue, Dave, for our article.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Yes, this guy does a deep dive. The article is, Did Columbia Game the U.S. News College Rankings with Sketchy Data? And it's by a gentleman called Jordan Ellenberg, who is a math professor at the University of Wisconsin and the author of Shape, the Hidden Geometry of Information, Biology, Strategy, Democracy, and Everything Else. So this guy is a true numbers guy, and he uses the numbers to debunk the whole U.S. News ranking system. And it's what we've been preaching on all the last couple of years. So what did he show? Well, first of all, he pointed out that this fall, Columbia University celebrated a significant achievement. It rose all the way to number 2 in the much-watched U.S. News and World Report ranking, behind only Princeton. It was its highest ranking ever. But what's even more phenomenal is that Columbia, this has made a stunning rise of Columbia through the rankings. In 1988, it was number 18. And in the last 20 years, it has sailed by such competitors as Stanford and Yale and University of Chicago to basically enjoy number 2 behind only Princeton. So what's the secret to its success? What's the secret sauce to this magnificent rise? Well, there's a big problem. According to a math professor from Columbia, Michael Thaddeus, the data that Columbia has been supplying has been spiced with a liberal amount of number 2. And when he refers to number 2, this refers to a particular part of human excrement.
By the way, Dave, it took me a long time to figure that out. I'm reading it. I'm like, why is he referring to a number 2 pencil? You see how mine thinks. Number 2 pencil. Right. And then I'm like, oh, he's talking about feces.
That's right. And so basically, the bottom line is Columbia is full of caca poo-poo. Here's another way. And here's the reasons why. He gave 3 great reasons. He said, number 1, okay, the U.S. News has as one of its criteria, quote, instructional spending per student. Okay, and U.S. News says that Columbia's instructional spending for a student is $3.1 billion. There's just a little problem with that. According to Thaddeus, that would mean that Columbia is actually spending more for instructional spending on its students than Harvard, Yale, and Princeton combined. Phenomenal. How did it do that? But it goes back to this great quote that I've always said that Mark really likes, is that statistics are like a bikini. What they show is interesting, but what they conceal is absolutely vital. And he basically says, do you really think Columbia spends more on its students than Harvard, Princeton, and Yale altogether? Thaddeus suggests that it does not. It says if you look into the numbers, it says that Columbia reports a much lower figure for instruction and educational administration, and those statements include a large separate expense at $1.2 billion for patient care. In other words, what it's doing, it's combining a lot of the data from its medical institutions with the undergraduate institutions to create an inflated figure that can't be correct when you actually look closely at the data. I'm not going to go into the weeds here because this is math professors arguing about numbers, but the bottom line is he's saying the numbers don't add up. He says, but that's not the only issue. He looks at another criteria, and that is what percent of faculties hold what they call terminal degrees. That is the highest degree possible in the field. Well, guess what Columbia says? It says 100%. Every single one of its faculty had a terminal degree. But there's just a problem. if you actually look inside the data, Thaddeus found that 69 professors did not. And Columbia said, well, that's just because we can, in certain fields, that's a judgment call. Nevertheless, to think that Columbia has 100% of its professors having terminal degrees when no other institution can come close to that is just not plausible. He also cast doubt, thirdly, on Columbia's claim that 82.5% of its undergraduate courses have 20 or fewer students. And the magazine lists only 4 universities with a higher percentage, much smaller schools like Gallaudet, Wilmington, Touro, and Cardinal Stritch. Well, Thaddeus found that the proportion of courses with enrollments that small at Columbia was closer to 65%, nowhere near the 82.5% figure. So those are 3 major categories where Thaddeus is saying Columbia is doing more than fudging the numbers. It's so implausible that they could actually be seen as being purposely deceptive. But he basically has an interesting twist. It says, this looks bad for Columbia. But here's a question. What if Columbia actually had tried to manipulate its true data to reach these implausible numbers? Well, what he's basically saying is, would meeting these benchmarks make Columbia actually a better place to go to college? Well, by the rules of the U.S. News survey, yes, it would. So he's basically saying that these criteria mean nothing to the actual education of kids. You know, the fact that you might have 10 more faculty having a particular degree ranking, or the fact that you might have a couple more courses with 30 kids and not 20 kids, makes no difference to the education you're providing these kids. Yet you have a ranking system that's putting a disproportionate impact on what are essentially irrelevant criteria. And I know you want to have a lot to say, Mark, so I'm just going to close with this quote, okay? Towards the end of the piece, Thaddeus quotes Columbia President Lee Bollinger, who said in 2003, "Rankings give a false sense of the world and an inauthentic view of what a college education really is." And then Thaddeus concludes with his own summation, quote, "No one should try to reform or rebuild the U.S. News rankings. It is irredeemable." So let me throw this back to you, Mark, and see what you think.
Yeah, thanks. And I encourage everybody to actually read Thaddeus' article. You can just Google it. The name of it is An Investigation of the Facts Behind Columbia's U.S. News Ranking by Michael Thaddeus, Columbia math professor. It came out in February of 2022. It's a little pedantic. It's definitely numbers driven, but it's just so overwhelmingly clear that this was not an accident. It's so abundantly clear that this is intentional fabrication. I want to start out with a brief story. So everyone knows the famous Anika on my podcast. Well, the first Anika I ever met was a student I worked with named Anika. And she's my first student I worked with, and I recruited her actually to boarding school, and I was her advisor for all 4 years. I became her college counselor. She's actually the first student I ever worked with to go to Davidson off in 2007. So after she graduated from Davidson, because she was very active in tour guiding and doing all that stuff there, she got an admissions job. And she worked at the Haverford School, selective school just outside of Philly. And she had Atlanta as her territory. And so it was great. So every time she came down to Atlanta, we would meet for lunch. And we did that for 3 straight years. And then she went off to law school. Now she's an attorney. But I remember one time we were having lunch. And I was really exercised. I was like, Anika, this is ridiculous. Look at all these schools that have been busted fabricating their rankings. And I talked about George Washington being busted and Wake Forest being busted. And I mentioned like about half a dozen schools that got busted. And I'll never forget her response. And she's like, I'm surprised that's all the only lit people they've caught so far, which was telling. And the implication for that should not be, well, people in education, they're all corrupt. The implication should be the incredible, inordinate amount of pressure that every single school faces to try to climb the rankings because of the power of these rankings. You literally have a situation right now where the tail is wagging the dog. A Cornell study came out. It was some time ago now, and I probably should have just, quoted it, or maybe sometime we'll discuss it. But It literally showed if you move just one or two places in the rankings, how much it impacts the number of applications you get and your yield, which is the percentage of accepted students that choose to come. So this is something people are aware of. And of course, boards pressure, presidents and provosts and then admission directors to climb their rankings. I once worked with a family that was a board member as the parent at a very prominent school. And they were my client. And the mom told me, I'm not going to mention the school. It's a very prominent school, though. The mom told me the pressure that the board would put on the admission office to climb these rankings. And so I mention that because think about Columbia. It's one of the most prestigious schools in the country. If Columbia feels this kind of pressure to fabricate their rankings, what does that say for other people that don't have the cachet that a Columbia has? Just interesting. So something to think about. Now, I want to read something to show just how preposterous these rankings are. And Dave shared some of this, but I think it's so important that I want to repeat it. So this is what it says. It's talking about the fact that one of the criteria is that U.S. News looks at is what percentage of your classes have under 20 kids in them. So this is what it says. What if Columbia had actually tried to hit the 82.5% mark that it claimed, classes under 20? Dave exposed how they never, that's like closer to numbers, closer to 65. But what if it actually tried to do it by rigorously capping enrollment in courses and shunting students to their second or third choice classes? What if they fired Nobel Prize winning faculty members because they don't hold a terminal degree? Because they're trying to have a higher percentage of people with a terminal degree. Of course, they just say they have 100. Would that make Columbia a better place to go to college? By the rules of the U.S. News game, it would. And that's the problem. Then he says, maybe straight up fabricating of the numbers is better than distorting your educational practices to conform to the metrics of the magazine. And then I love this line. He says, to the extent that universities chase rankings, whether it's through their policy changes or through sketchy numbers, they are declaring their real priorities. They are making it clear that the imaginary students envisioned by the ranking algorithm are more important than the real-life students that are present in their classrooms and their dorms. And what I loved about this is at first I was like, why is Thaddeus going off on his own? He clearly must have tenure, Dave. He's going off on his own school. But then I realized, and there's a quote in the article, and I agree with this, that's why Thaddeus' beef is not so much with Columbia as the whole apparatus of college ranking. I love this quote. If you think the relevant question here is, was Columbia's second place ranking correct, or should they have been lower, you are already conceding the claim that there is a correct ranking for Columbia to have, and there isn't. To place U.S. colleges in some pecking order from Princeton to umpteen hundred is to declare, whether you say it out loud or not, that colleges are one-dimensional. And that was the point I mentioned before with a place like American University, which is as good as it gets for political science, international relations, and many other things, but you're not going to see them ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, or even 20 in some overall rankings. How can you reduce a school to say it's one-dimensional like that? So that's the first point I wanted to make. Next point, and I love this point. He says, numbers carry a special sort of imperious authority. There's a tendency to let difference between numbers outweigh differences of feeling, even when the numerical differences are so small as to be insignificant. And this is really important. Hope you guys don't miss this. This is the way I explain it. Numbers do voodoo on your brain. Dave, we're going to really date ourselves, man. Like, really date ourselves. Do you remember growing up? Remember the show Bewitched?
Yep. Bewitched. With Darren and Mrs. Kravitz.
Yeah, you know it all. Yeah, but I remember the whatever her name, the blonde hair. I think of her. She could just put a spell on you and put you in a different trance. There you go.
That's right.
Yeah,
right.
And that's what numbers do to the brain. This is one reason why I think it's the actual strongest argument to go test optional. To me, the strongest argument go test optional is not the disparity between well-resourced families and moderate-resourced or under-resourced families and the ability to hire test prep pros. The strongest reason is not the research that shows the correlation between high test scores and family education and family wealth. The strongest argument is that people cannot hire the bias that numbers bring to the brain because numbers carry an imperious authority. If somebody sees something's ranked 14th versus 24, it's very difficult for them to get out of the brain that 14 must be better than 24. And I'm going to share a story with you, and I'm embarrassed to share this, but I'm going to share it. So I got to be very vague here because I can make sure nobody can ever know who I'm talking about. But there's a family I'm working with this year, and the student's getting in everywhere. He's getting in everywhere. I mean, these incredibly hard schools to get into. And one of the reasons why I've been so surprised, he's been getting all these merits. I mean, the family doesn't qualify for financial aid, but he's been getting all these big merit scholarships, is because I happen to know that when he took the ACT, after trying multiple times and, test prep and everything, the best he could get was a 25. Now, 25 is 83rd percentile. It's still better than 80% of people in the country, but it's not good for the schools he's getting in. And I keep looking at, why is he getting in all these schools that have like average ACTs of like 34? And why is that? Because of course I told him, don't sell those test scores. So he applied test optional. But still, and I've been doing this for almost a quarter century, I still can't get out of my mind he has a 25. That's the impact numbers have on your brain. This is why Lisa Prescott, the director of admission at UC Santa Barbara, who had been there 35 years at the time I interviewed her, 37 now. Now, this is before the UCs went test blind, said to me, we are thinking of not looking at test scores at all and using our software to just completely block out test scores so we don't see them because we're not sure if we can handle them. We're not sure if they will bias us too much when we read the files. And you say, well, is this some like really underrepresented student from something? No, this is overrepresented. This is one parent is Asian, one parent's Caucasian. He's getting in all these schools because they never saw his scores. I can tell you right now, if they saw those scores, he would not get in. Now, obviously, he's extraordinary in so many other ways. He wouldn't be getting in when it comes to his extracurriculars, his recommendations, his leadership, his curriculum. He's crushing it.
I was going to say, did Mark Zuckerberg's kid already graduate from high school? I thought they were younger than that. Did he just donate another UC campus on Santa Cruz or something?
But the point being that 25 bewitched me into seeing him at a certain level because that's the power of numbers. And I've been doing this for almost a quarter of a century. I should be able to just block that out. But it's still kind of in my mind. It's still kind of surprising that he keeps getting in these, super hard to get in schools and sometimes getting merit scholarships. That's the power of numbers. And that's what he refers to here when he says that numbers have an imperious authority. And so I mentioned it here in the context of test scores, but it also applies to rankings. And he goes on to say, this year, the list has University of Texas at Austin at 38 and Brandeis at 42. Would that slim a difference in ranking be a deciding factor between you for these wildly different houses of learning? So that's an important point. The imperious authority that numbers have, whether it's a ranking or a test score, to put voodoo on you and to bewitch you. So here's another point he makes, which I think is great. He says the National Research Council, which actually ranks graduate programs, they tried something a while ago. They tried using a multi-dimensional approach. They tried rating universities, instead of coming up with a ranking, they tried rating them on various factors and then letting people pick the criteria and roll out their own rankings. In other words, you choose how much weight you want to put on selectivity or test scores or location or, class size or professors with PhD, but all the criteria. They let the public decide. And this is what he says. Everybody hated it. He says the U.S. News ranking stays popular in contrast. Why? People crave simple. They crave definitive. What is better than what? Where should I go? But one of the key tasks of higher education is to equip us to resist that craving. And he compares it to a Snicker bar. He says, simple, definitive answers like you're ranked 17th and you're ranked 37th. That's a Snicker bar's way of thinking. What's Snicker bar's way of thinking? Satisfying for a moment, but dangerous when they displace a salad or healthier cognitive options. So he calls it Snicker bar way of thinking. There's a natural tendency for the brain to want to know this is better than that. And the last point I want to make, which I thought was a good one, and I have to admit, when this story broke, Dave, you know what my first thought was? I kind of love this story because it's undermining the validity of the rankings. Right now, we have a scandal going on with Rutgers related to fabrication with rankings. We have another scandal with USC in regard to rankings. We got the Columbia scandal. And the more of these scandals that break out and hit the public, maybe the best way to undermine the rankings is for everybody to say, oh, it's a bunch of malarkey. It's a bunch of hullabaloo. All that stuff's all, phony, baloney, made-up data, fabricated data. So maybe that's one of the good things. Like, that's why I've loved the proliferation of all the rankings. Because you tell me a school's ranked 17th here, I'll show you that it's 97th over here, and it's 54th over here, and it's 32nd over here. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, maybe the whole thing, I don't need to put so much confidence in it. The rankings are all over the place. So this is what he says, and I like this. He said, obviously it's bad to tinker with numbers, to wrestle with yourself above your own Ivy League rivals. But I can't help but wanting to turn to the bright side of this story. Wouldn't it be great if the scandal helped loosen our belief in the U.S. News list? And then he takes a zinger shot at Jared Kushner. He said the same way Jared Kushner's eyebrow-raising Harvard admission loosened our belief in elite college admissions being synonymous with merit. So what he's referring to there, I referred to a book last week called The Price of Admission by Daniel Golden. And an investigative reporter went in and he did all this research on how elite families buy their way into elite schools through donations and bribery and things like that. And it profiled how the strings to which Jared Kushner's dad went to give a multi-million-dollar gift to Harvard to get his very average kid into Harvard. So that's what he's referring to. So he said, just like Jared Kushner being exposed put a dent in our belief that college admissions is all about a meritocracy, wouldn't it be great if this scandal just helped loosen the grip that the U.S. News has a little bit on our perception? So that's all I have to say, Dave. Any final thoughts?
No, I think you said it all. I mean, the bottom line is the rankings are problematic, and you have to put them in context, and they are way overrated. Keep in mind that U.S. News Report has long since gotten out of business in its original mission of providing U.S. news. It's no longer a magazine of any import. The only reason it exists and has a payroll is to come up with these rankings. And the other thing that people don't realize is it does no checking on the data that it's presented. So it's like saying, I want to apply to be a college athlete, and sending in your scores for your track meets, and the college is not doing any effort to verify that you actually even ran in that track meet. I mean, this is all self-reported, unverifiable data. The U.S. News is a skeleton operation. It does not have nearly the resources necessary to check on the validity of its data, and colleges know this.
They do some checking because they kind of know, like, the extent to which, like, we keep getting exposed for fabricated data. Our whole thing goes down like a deck of cards. But your point that's the most valid is they don't have anywhere near the resources to do it. And in preparation for this article, I actually sent Dave like a bunch of articles on the same topic. And one of them that we didn't pick that was really good is by Malcolm Gladwell. And he closes his article that he wrote. I want to quote him here because it's relevant to this topic. He just goes off, man. He just goes off on Columbia. And then he says, in my next letter, I'm going to ask for a response from Columbia. I'm going to ask U.S. News whether they even read Thaddeus' paper. I mean, do they even care? Or did they long ago give up on the pretense that theirs is anything other than a hopeless, cynical enterprise? And then he closes by saying, stay tuned. So to the extent to which this undermines the whole thing and it comes down like a deck of cards and people, look at it askance, then, keep on keeping on. Good stuff. And you go, Michael Thaddeus. Thank you for the service you've provided for humanity.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Hey, Lisa, how's it going?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Good. I'm very excited about what we're going to talk about today. And I have to thank you because you're always finding these great resources and great articles. I say Dave is the one who sends me articles, but I think you've topped Dave now. You've really sent me some good stuff recently.
It's my procrastination way of not doing my billing and paperwork. So
I didn't think the word procrastination and you even existed in the same planet.
Well, it's relative, right? I'm just not doing it super early.
Okay.
So
I remember the lessons learned from Dad on that.
Yeah.
Steve.
Yeah. If you can do it now, do it now. That's right.
Awesome. Well, before we get to that, as you know, I like to share things I think might surprise people if they were in admissions. And one of the ones I want to talk about today is, our school's really test optional when they say they're test optional. My experience for the most part is they are. I've been very, very pleased with how my test non-submitters have done. Extremely, to be honest. But there's one area that people should know that test scores really do matter, and that is like athletes applying to D3 schools.
Mm-hmm.
They have to go through an athletic pre-read process. I'm taking about 8 kids through that. And they want to see test scores. Yes, technically, we are test optional, but it's going to be a lot easier for me to get you through that committee. So I'm talking about like the NESCAP type schools and those, competitive D3 conferences, Centennial. I would also include the University Athletic Association and the Southern California Intercollegiate Conference, amongst others. Some of these competitive D3 conferences. For athletes applying to Division III schools, strongly academic schools, they really want to see test scores. I'm just going to put that out there. That is one area that I do not find that schools are test optional.
Well, that is good to know.
For your super athletic Thomas coming along the way?
I don't think that's going to be an issue for him. I mean, Sonia.
He's got lots of other gifts.
I'm not sure. But, if
Sonia, the new tennis player.
Yeah, if it was esports, then,
sure.
If that was something. But I don't see that really happening for him. So, but, who knows? People change, right?
Hey, and we have Sonia in tennis.
That's right. So who knows where it'll all go. So
I hear you. So, Lisa, you and I both have been strongly recommending everybody watch Try Harder.
Yes.
The documentary series. And by the way, I'm getting really good feedback from people that have been listening to it and watching it. But according to the producer, it is going to be airing on the 2nd of May on PBS. So this goes live on the 28th of April. So I just would encourage people, if you don't want to pay the $2.99 on YouTube, and you just want to catch it on, yeah, if you want to go cheapo, you can catch it on PBS on in the next few days on the 2nd of May. So I wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, no, that's a great tip.
All right, so this topic today is so important that I'm just going to say right up front, this is going to be a 2-parter. I don't want to rush it. I want us to do justice to this article. It reminds me, Lisa, back in 2019, when I got so concerned about mental health that I said it is the biggest concern that I have for students right now. It's bigger than the cost of college. It's bigger than people picking the wrong fit or match. It's bigger than the amount of college debt. It's bigger than students graduating and not being able to find employment. Bigger than even this anti-college mindset that's permeating the country. Like, this is my concern right now. My biggest concern is mental health. And it's gotten worse in the last couple of years.
Yes, it has.
Yeah. So Lisa sent me this great article called Why American Teens Are So Sad. And I said to myself, we got to get this article on. But we already had articles committed to like 225. So I said, what if I say, question from a listener, Mark from Fairburn. Mark from Fairburn is me. Mark from Fairburn is my question, which I'm asking Lisa. What does she think of this article? Why American teens are so sad. So I'm going to start out and do the Dave thing, the initial summary, and then throw it to Lisa for expert opinion. So the article is by Derek Thompson. It's in the Atlantic, and it's 4 forces are propelling the rising rates of depression among young people. And it looks at those 4 forces. And it starts out by sharing some alarming stats. So it looks at some research and, for example, a CDC study that was done. And the CDC study had 8,000 high school students in it, which is a very, very, very substantial study. And it looked at the number of students that are saying they have persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. And that number came in at 44%, which is alarming. And that number has gone up. In 2009, it was 26%, which is already high. So it basically went from 1 in 4 to almost 1 in 2. And the study said that this is the highest level of teenage sadness that has ever been recorded. And it goes on to say that it's not equally distributed. It's worse for some people than others. For example, more than 1 in 4 girls reported that they had seriously, this is alarming, seriously contemplated suicide during the pandemic. I got to repeat that. More than 1 in 4 girls reported that they seriously contemplated suicide during the pandemic, which was twice the rate of boys. Nearly half of LGBTQ teens said that they had contemplated suicide. Half during the pandemic, compared with 14% of heterosexual peers. And so it has all this data in here. And here's a quote from the article. Since 2009, sadness and hopelessness have increased for every race, for straight teens, gay teens, for teens who say they never had sex, for those who say they had sex, with males and or females, for students in each year of high school, for teens in all 50 states and DC. So even that it's worse for certain demographics, it's going up for everybody. And so the article looks at why is this happening? And I actually liked it. It started by saying it addressed 3 fallacies that people might think explain it. And so the first fallacy is that it's just teens behaving bad. Teens are just behaving bad, and that's how it explains it. But then it goes on to say since the 1990s, drinking and driving is down 50%, school fights are down 50%, sex before 13 is down more than 70%, school bullying is down. So it just, completely just abrogates that argument. Second fallacy is that teens have always been moody and that sadness looks like it is rising only because people are more willing to talk about it. But it says this does not explain it because objective measures of anxiety, depression, and you can look at a lot of things, it mentions things like self-harming behavior, eating disorders, teen suicides, all sharply up the past decades. It says across the country, we have witnessed dramatic increases in the emergency department visits. So you can't just say it's about teens being more moody. There's objective research to show that things are at an unprecedented level. And then it says the third fallacy is that today's mental health crisis was principally caused by the pandemic, and it's just an overreaction to COVID. And it basically blows that concern out of the water too. It says rising teen sadness isn't a new trend, but rather an accelerant of a broadening trend that started before that. So it talks about the 4 causes that are propelling it. And the first is social media use. So what do you want to say about that one, Lisa? We'll take them one by one.
Well, I think with social media use, it's really complicated, the relationships that teens have to social media use. And one of the points of this article is that people react to social media use kind of like they react to alcohol. So for some people, it's like kind of fun and it's mildly addicting. But for other people, it can cause a complete dependence. And then that can cause a lot of depression and anxiety. And, Instagram actually researched this, and they're very expert on the effect that their app has on teenage girls. And they found that while most girls had a positive relationship with the app, they enjoyed it, they used it to communicate with their friends, there's 1/3 said that they were addicted to it. They couldn't log on, but it made them feel horrible about themselves. So when you have something like that, teens are already worried about what other people think. That's part of their development. It's called egocentrism. And that is that, they're very worried about how they're going to appear to other people. They're very worried about how they compare to other people. It's a brain physiological thing that goes away as they approach adulthood. So they are so vulnerable to social media. They are so vulnerable to this. And it has really accelerated a lot of insecurity, low self-esteem, and also I think that kids tend to, just like it makes them hard. It doesn't give them any coping skills. It just presents the problem, right? Over and over and over and over. You need to lose weight. You're not smart enough. This person's going to get into Yale. This person isn't. Here's what you need to do to get into Yale. All these different things. And so it's really sad, I think.
Yeah, I talk to Joy about this stuff a lot because, one, she's basically trying to be little mini Lisa over here. She's studying clinical mental health counseling. But she's 23, and she's just kind of right at that age where, like, I even noticed a difference between Joy at 23 and Karis at 26 in terms of, like, the role social media has even played in their lives. And Joy really feels like social media is a very, very, very high correlate to the mental health issues and the impossible standards that it creates.
Right.
There's one quote from the article here that I want to read. It says, why would social media affect teenage mental health in this way? One explanation is that teenagers, and teenage girls in particular, are uniquely sensitive to the judgment of friends, teachers, and the digital crowd. And that's kind of what you're saying, and what's one of the reasons why I was thinking about the egocentrism, which, by the way, I remember studying that in undergrad. So I'm like, I can relate to that. Of course, this is one of the reasons why I'm really concerned with all the students that I work with that are at these highly selective private schools or these very, very competitive affluent suburban schools, because the mindset is often that there's 20 to 30 good schools, and the peer judgment and the peer pressure that they feel to be respected by their peers that they're going to a good school. It's just too much. It just blows their circuits.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely devastating. When I was a young girl many, many years ago, I would say certainly we had social comparison. Certainly, there was a whole industry designed to make me think I was not attractive enough or thin enough or whatever enough. But, that was more like I could turn off the TV. I didn't have to buy the magazine, and so I could go read a book or do something else. It wasn't ever present. Now it's 24/7. It's in your hand. It's all the time. It's alerting you. So-and-so liked this. So-and-so commented this. You can't, it's like there's no space you can create for yourself outside of that viewpoint if you're an active social media user. And I think that almost all teens are.
Yeah, and another area where I see it is how many followers people have.
Oh, yeah.
That's a big thing to them, as a sign of social popularity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's it's like we talk about people use numbers to, obviously the number of followers a person has in no way indicates the worth of that human being, right? But that's like a quantifiable metric that people can use to kind of judge that and rank people, which is really sad. I saw, I guess the superintendent of our school district posted on Twitter that her kids all go to our school district, and her son got his phone. He got caught with a phone at school. He wouldn't give it to the teacher. So when he got home, he got it taken away, and he was really insistent that if his mom was going to take his phone away for a week, that she continue all of his Snapchat streaks. And that was the most devastating thing to him, that somehow he would lose that kind of social currency without the phone.
Sure. Well, I know you just brought flashbacks to me. I know taking the phone away, that was big. That's a big punishment there.
No, and then and so you kind of hate to do it because it's like taking someone's communication, their lifeline away. But then on the other hand, yeah, I don't know. And I think you're right. Like there's so much pressure that kids amplify about where they're going to go to college on social media. A friend here, she was telling me that her daughter made a decision. She's going to go to Oberlin. They're so happy. And they had hired a college counselor who'd help them make a great list. And so this student had a great experience, but she wasn't applying to all the top 20 schools, but all of her friends did. And they were destroyed in the process of doing it. So many rejections, being deferred only to find out it was never going to happen. And these kids are all really devastated. And it's just like really sad to hear that. I'm sure these are all fantastic, smart, bright, amazing people with a lot of potential. And yet they're coming out of this feeling terrible about themselves. And for what?
Yeah, that was one thing I really consciously managed with my kids. I was determined they were not going to feel that way. Went to great lengths to shelter them from that. And so they almost can't relate to that kind of thinking because they were just protected and sheltered from that. I didn't always protect them from social media. Like Dave was very strict with Lauren and her exposure. She wasn't allowed to have this stuff. And sometimes I wondered if maybe I should have done that more. But, it's tricky. Parenting is hard. And, I also have one of the kind of kids that it would have been absolutely World War III if I would have tried something like that,
Yeah, well, I have one of those too.
those strong wills are tough.
Oh yeah. But I agree. And I was telling Mark before we started recording that, my oldest daughter is very strong-willed. She has never been one to conform to society's pressures if she doesn't like it, and I admire it honestly. And like we kind of knew her college search was going to be different from like freshman year on, but it worked out really well for her. She's at a great place. She applied to like 14 schools. She got into all of them. She feels great about herself with her, college application process and how it all turned out. But we certainly didn't send in an application to Harvard or Yale because that would just never, ever in a million years have happened. But, I think it's fine, and I'm just glad that she kind of liberated me from that kind of thinking.
Well, I really like to see kids get more acceptances than denials. I just think that when you get a lot of rejections, it's just hard. It's like, it's just very, very hard. And so, I think parents can play a really big role in here in terms of like kids want to please their parents. And if you feel like certain schools are very good schools, it's one of the best ways to counteract a lot of the noise if they're getting it from other places.
Right. Yeah. And I think you have to start early with that.
You do. And it's harder if you're in, one of these real pressure cooker environments too. I don't believe in rankings. And so when we moved to Atlanta, like the best ranked school is Westminster in Atlanta. It's the best ranked school, and I wasn't interested in Westminster. It's a very good school. I was meeting with them today, but it's got more of that mindset. And I just was not going to let my kids go anywhere near that. I've known Marjorie, their director, since 2002, and she's fantastic. She invited our family to several events, courting our kids, and she was surprised that neither of my kids applied to Westminster. And so, I made sure they were in a very good school. I mean, it has a tremendous track record of sending kids that have done really well in college, but it intentionally is aligned with our philosophy on not having that type of mindset. So was there some of that? Sure, there was some of it, but it wasn't as prevalent as I see in other places. And I think as a parent, you got to grab hold of that in any way you can. And listen, we're talking in the college process, but it applies to other things too, right? Because one of the other things that can happen is kids can feel less than if all the ways in which they're judged is by how much money they have. Like I remember a student that I worked with, and he went off to a summer camp. It was an academic summer camp, and there was a lot of, and he's, it was a pretty wealthy family, but it was a lot of affluence there. And so what the conversation was the kids were all Zillowing how much everybody's home was worth.
For Lord's sake.
And it created this whole pecking order that, this kid doesn't even live in $1 million home kind of thing. And then now there's social pressure coming at the kid from that. And I've worked with kids who I'm just embarrassed to have anybody come to my house because I kind of know how people think. And anything that I think parents can do to intervene and to be aggressive at trying to maybe even remove your kid from that environment or do everything you can to counteract it, because this is just one of the many ways it comes at you. You want to move on to number 2?
Sure. Let's move on to number 2.
So it says sociality. I don't even know that word. I'm term
Sociality.
Sociality. Yeah, I'm not, but socializing is really describes socializing, right?
Yeah.
Same
Socializing,
thing?
is down.
Socializing is down. And so that's the point. Socializing is down. So what do you want to say about this point, Lisa?
Well, I mean, they present the data that kids are on social media like more than 5 hours a day. And so, there's only 24 hours in the day, so you got to give something up. So what are kids giving up? Number 1 is sleep, right? The percent of kids who got 8 or more hours of sleep declined 30% from 2007 to 2019. And we all know that sleep is one of the biggest cornerstones of mental health that there is. If you don't get adequate sleep, you are probably just signing yourself up for depression and anxiety and a lot of other discomfort, emotional and physical. Also, kids don't go out with their friends as much anymore. They're much later in getting their driver's license, and they're less likely to play any kind of sports. So the social media life seems to be the social life. And of course, COVID really accelerated that trend quite a bit. And that's not that's just how it was. But kids aren't coming back from that and saying, hey, I'm going to go back to getting my license. Let's go meet at the mall. Let's go play, basketball at the park as much as they used to. They're kind of addicted and stuck to that mode of interaction right now. And there's a lot of loneliness that really ultimately can come with that. It's like I'm not saying that social media relationships aren't real and they're not good, but it's not the same as really spending time with other people, having face-to-face conversations with other people, from a psychological perspective. And it is, it sets up people to be at higher risk for depression, and especially for teens. And, there's some thinking that, who is the most important person in a teen's life? In their psychology. It's not their parents in a way, it's their peer group, right? And, the peer group, it's got good and bad things, but, sometimes being in that peer group protects them from stressful events or gives them resiliency. And if they're not, getting that because they're, not interacting in person with people as much, they're going to be more vulnerable to other stresses that are going to happen. Yeah,
and the article makes the point that this is connected to social media. So it starts out by saying, both Steinberg and Twenge, two people that did research, stressed that the biggest problem with social media might not be social media, but rather what it replaces, which is just what you're talking about. And the article says today's teens spend more than 5 hours daily on social media in this article. And then, of course, it talks about the sleep, like you mentioned. And then there's something here that grabbed me. And so in my notes, I used Arial bold. You know how big that is, Lisa. I just switched my font to Arial bold. It's just huge to emphasize it because it really resonated with me. And this is a quote. It says, "It is well established that what protects teens from stress is close social relationships."
Right. Absolutely.
So what are your thoughts on that point, Lisa, as a psychologist?
Well, I mean, I think, again, that's developmental. It goes along with the egocentrism. It goes along with that, this idea that adults are dumb, they're idiots, right? They're trying to separate from adults. They're trying to be more affiliative with their peers, and that is what gives them a lot of support. It gives them modeling for how to handle things. They see other people going through things, and you take that away, and I think you have a big problem. And, for the most part, I think most kids probably have some in-person school available to them at this time. But, the behavior hasn't changed. They might be going to school, but they're still coming home and spending the whole time in the room, on their phone. And, I can't tell you how many times that I hear parents complain about that I'm always yelling at my own kids, like, to get off the phone, get off the computer, that I see, my nieces, they're doing the same thing, and be like, my niece, Megan, take your headphones off, talk to me. I'm only in town for a little while, and, she's lovely and charming when I can get her, but that's not her thing. She's into that phone. And so it's such a changed world.
Well, I looked at this as an opportunity. So if we accept that, it's well established that what protects teens from stress is close social relationships. What can we do to foster that as parents? You know, because there are things that you can do to foster it. Maybe you're taking a family trip and maybe your child wants to have one of their good friends come along, you know, and wow, this is an opportunity to build a close social relationship. Well, but there's so many different things that we can do to foster that. Maybe, you know, whatever. Would you want to go out to a restaurant with your friend and I'll pay for it or whatever it is.
Right.
But there's just different things that we can do if we believe that close social relationships is a way to protect kids from, you know, some of these ills that befall them right now. Then I think it behooves us to do everything in our power, especially if we agree with if we like the friend, right? Let's face it, we know peers influence them. So if we think this is a positive friend, that we approve of the relationship, we think it's healthy, we think that you know, that this is somebody that is aligned with our values and everything, then we should be doing everything we can to create a climate and environment to allow that relationship to just soar like a fire taking off. You know, because the thing about this article is it's mostly negative.
Yeah.
It's reality check and it's important. But I always look for that those nuggets of positivity, like what can we extract from this that we can proactively do to not have all of these, you know, mental health issues beset our kids. I mean, it's ridiculous. 25% of people seriously contemplating suicide, and that number being 50% in the LGBTQ community. Like something has to stop.
Well, you know, and this is the thing that, really early on in the pandemic, I foresaw the future and I was scared because
You said that on the podcast.
I knew that the pandemic was going to accelerate every mental illness problem that there was in this society. And I also knew there already wasn't space in the mental health system to treat it. And, you know, unfortunately, that's very, very true. People can't get their kids, you know, what the services that they need, meds, evaluations, therapy, because there are no providers available. And I don't see how this is going to get better without some corrections with that, you know, because I think it's, you know, if we can encourage our kids to get out of the house and go do things with other people, that's great. But I think some of these kids are too withdrawn. It's too far gone. Now it's a problem that's going to need intervention, probably clinical intervention. And, you know, there isn't anyone to do it. And it makes me so sad that this has happened to, you know, it's happening to adults too, but particularly our children. You know, every day on Facebook, I'm in this Chapel Hill Carborough mothers group, and every day 3 or 4 people I need a therapist for my kid. Can anyone help me? And I'm just yeah, no one can help you. You know, there's nobody there. I mean, maybe there are some people, but you really have to be very persistent. You have to work really hard. And yeah, because I think for some of these kids, it's, you know, once you get depressed, you can't make yourself do any of the things that will make you not depressed. That's like a symptom of depression, right? So once it happens, you can't pull out of it. You can't just pull yourself up by your bootstraps or decide, you know? So at that point you need help. And I'm afraid you know, and talk to any pediatrician and they will back me up on this. We don't have the help, you know, and that it makes me so sad.
Now, one thing that's really hitting me in this conversation is I really just see how devastating sort of Zoom school was. All this talk we've talked about the smartphones and social media, but school was one place where some of that socialization could occur, in-person school.
Yeah, I mean, it forced it to occur. It had to occur. And if you didn't go, the police would come eventually and take you to school, you know?
Right. But I'm also talking about it was conducive to cultivating some of those quality relationships that had some depth and substance, that were somewhat of a protector. And it really hit me. Now, this is another quote that I did my same Arial bold. That means Arial bold means I have to read it. Yeah.
Look out.
So, yeah, look out, world. Yeah. So this one hit me as well. And it says this: aloneness isn't the same as loneliness, and loneliness isn't the same as depression. But more aloneness, and then parentheses, including from heavy smartphone use, and more loneliness, parenthesis, including from school closures, might have combined to push up sadness amongst teenagers who need sociality.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's like it was a perfect storm, right? It was a perfect storm to just take out, almost a generation of kids. Because, with school, like, you're interacting with peers, but you're also having interactions with adults who aren't your family. So a teacher might notice that you're having a problem. There's a guidance counselor there, a social worker there. The gym teacher might talk to you about it. I mean, there's just so many or more opportunities for helpful interactions than there are on Zoom in your house, And I think like you see what happens like when you take that away. And, I have to say, like, I always would say, like, kids are resilient. I no longer believe that kids are any more resilient than any other human being. Like we sort of say that to comfort ourselves, but kids are people. And if you don't give people the situations that they need to be in to have adequate mental health, they won't. And, some people are incredibly resilient, but as a group, I don't think we are. And I don't think we appreciated that.
Maybe we're resilient, but it's like everybody's got their limits. Like, you know what I mean? Like when all the sockets are just blowing the fuse out at the same time, your electricity's going off.
Right.
It's my, kind of thing. Friends, this concludes part 1 of my discussion with Lisa. Next week, we will resume our final part.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
All right, friends, we're starting a new interview, and I'm very excited because I've never interviewed a college president before. And I'll be interviewing 2 in the next few months on this podcast. It was after this first one I thought I'm going to interview another one. So what Roger Parrott talks about is, what is it that keeps a college president up at night? What are the big factors that are shaping higher education? So you get that big helicopter view behind the scenes. And I think you're going to really enjoy it. It's a 3-parter. Well, it's a 2-parter on forces shaping higher education, and then the last segment will talk particularly about the school he's at, Belhaven University, which is doing some really great things. Listen and enjoy. Friends, very excited today. I'm here with Roger Parrott, the president of Belhaven University in Jackson, Mississippi. Welcome to the podcast, Roger.
Well, it's a treat to be with you. I so admire what you do, and so I'm honored to be included. Thank you.
Let me just say one thing. You've been recognized as one of the 10 most visionary educational leaders in 2021 by Education Magazine. So I think the pleasure and the honor is ours.
You're kind. You're kind. Yeah, that was kind of a surprise. And, I just focus on Belhaven and what we're doing and opportunities that are before us. And higher education is changing so rapidly that I think we've all got to be entrepreneurial and think differently about how to best deliver education for students so they can absorb it and have productive lives. I mean, that's what it's about. So we can't be stuck in just what we've always done. And higher education can tend to do that. We tend to rely on our history rather than our future.
Well, we're going to get into some of those changes in a sec, Roger. But before we do, please share your backstory, where you grew up, how you got interested in higher ed, other jobs you've had. I always like to have our listeners kind of understand your context before we get into our content and topic for the day.
Sure. Well, I'm a little bit unusual in that I'm a 3rd-generation university president. My father and grandfather were both college presidents, and Chronicle of Higher Education, we've talked to them, and we know a lot of 2nd-generation presidents. We don't know of any other 3 generations. So it's kind of interesting that I grew up in a president's home, so I kind of understood what I was getting into. It wasn't really, though, what pulled me in this direction. In fact, I kind of had decided I didn't want to do that. I kind of wanted to do anything but that, as a lot of young people do when they're growing up. But I don't know. Maybe it's in my genes or my bones or whatever. But
well, I'll say this. I'm 4th-generation educator family. I'm not college president, but educator, and I didn't start out in this path initially, but I do think there's something about it that gets in the bloodstream, and you kind of come back to your roots.
I think there really is, and I work at my grandfather's desk, a desk he had made back in the 1930s when he was a president. And my grandfather always said, college president's the best job in the world as long as you can pay the bills. And, it is true because I get to work with idealistic, energetic young people. I get to work with faculty who are experts in their area. I get to essentially run a little city on my own. And I own my own football team. So, it doesn't get any better than that.
Now, you're obviously in Jackson, Mississippi. Is that also where you were born and raised? I mean, tell us a little bit about your path.
I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, Portland and Seattle, and went to school in the East in Boston and did my doctorate at Maryland. And and then I've been in Kansas for a while as president of Sterling College there. But I've been here 26 years now, 33 altogether in the presidency, and your viewers can't see it because we're on audio, but I look a lot younger than all those years add up to be. So I just have got a lot of energy for what's ahead for higher ed. I do love it. I was out of it for a short period of time working with the Lausanne Committee for World Evangelization, which was founded by Dr. Billy Graham, and engaged in developing a major congress in the Philippines for evangelism back in the late 80s. But other than that, have spent my whole life in higher ed and do love it. My wife teaches English at Belhaven. She's got a doctorate in English. Both my kids graduated. My son's a librarian and my daughter's an actor. So higher education has really been our life of how to pass on to the next generation.
So you would probably know as well as anybody, if somebody wants to become a president, what's your recommendation to them? Like, besides get a doctorate, what are the other things they need to do?
Well, the doctorate's a calling card. It's a little hard to do it without it. It is more often it's happening. My question to people who ask me how to become a college president is always, do you want to get the job or do you want to do the job? Because I think a lot of people want to get the job because they assume there's prestige, etc. With it. I mean, you say you're a college president, everybody knows what that is. You don't have to explain it. But to me, it's doing the job. It's being in the trenches every day. It's. I had a college president, a friend who was elected. He was very excited about being a college president. I said, when they put that chain around your neck and the medallion of the university, don't assume that makes you the source of all wisdom. Make that your reminder. You got to make payroll. And you got to deal with big curriculum issues, but you also got to make sure the women's softball team's got new uniforms and the chillers are fixed. So, you've got to dig in at all levels in this job. And I think the effective presidents do, and those who are doing it for the prestige don't last very long. And we see a lot of turnover in higher ed because of that.
No, that's helpful. And Roger, I think you might be coming up very close to being interview number 90 if we're not there yet. For us here on Your College Bound Kid, but you're our first college president. And a few years ago, I said, I want to interview a college president because I want to get that macro view. I want to get that helicopter view of what's going on in higher ed. And when I look at you with your, recognition for visionary leadership, I think you're a great person to answer some of those questions for us today. So why don't we start with this? What are the major trends that you feel are currently impacting higher ed? And I know from our pre-meeting, and I agree with this, that you feel more, comfortable speaking, not so much about the public sector, but more in the private school sector.
Yeah. And I will speak primarily about the private school sector, although as we, from our earlier talk, I have thought a little bit more about the public, and there are some commonalities. Of course, COVID has changed everything for right now, and that's hopefully a temporary issue, but let's get past COVID, and some schools are coping very well with that, and others are kind of making a mess out of it. I think one of the big questions facing higher ed is the whole question is it worth it? And the whole is it worth it question kind of comes down, unfortunately, to, well, is college going to help me get a better job, or is college not going to help me get a better job? Or could I do better in a trade rather than a college? And, help us. We need wonderful people in trades. So I am supportive of that. I tell my campus all the time, the single most important person on our campus is the plumber. If the plumber doesn't do their job well, none of the rest of us are in business. So, let's honor those who choose a different path. But I think the question about is it worth it shouldn't just be about the amount of dollars you can generate, although that is important. We know, and your studies show, and mine do too. If a student goes to college, they're probably going to make $2.5, $3 million more in their lifetime. So yeah, it's a huge investment. And why wouldn't you borrow, $25,000, $30,000 to get $2.5 million back? That's an easy decision. But I think the question to me is a broader question of what are you building into your life that helps you to have a happy and successful life, which is more than just getting a paycheck. It's about who you are, your character, your development, your outlook on life, all those kinds of things. I mentioned I was president of a school in Kansas, and it was out in the middle of really central Kansas, and I mean it was real farmland. And there was an old story we used to tell, and from higher ed, I don't think it's probably real, but it still makes for a good story about the farmer who went to Harvard. And he went to Harvard, got a 4-year degree in classics and in humanities, and came back to run the farm. And they said, why did you go to Harvard and study for 4 years to come back and sit on a tractor? He said, now I got something to think about. And, there's some very strong truth in that. It's not just a matter of skills for a job. It's what's going to go on in your mind every day for the next 50, 60 years of your life, and how you prepare that, I think, is important. So the question of is it worth it, I think, needs a broader perspective. I think another issue facing higher ed is a whole national discussion about free college. And it's kind of, we have some free college now. I mean, in a lot of places you can go for free, especially to community college. You can go for free if you want that. My kids were homeschooled, and so they'd never been a class in their life. And so when they got ready to go to college, we thought, well, we ought to get them in a class and let's let them experience that before they come to school. So we enrolled them in the community college, and they started with a class of 30 students, and about 3 classes they were in. At the end, there were about 4 students left in each one. And so sometimes you get what you pay for when you go for free. And I think this whole question of entitlement to free, it is a matter of what you get, what you pay for. And often what schools are projecting as free is not free. I mean, I had a friend who got a full ride scholarship to one of the flagships across the South here, and then they were talking with me about how they needed to get another job because the other expenses beyond the free were so high for the sorority and the fees and the this and that. It cost them another $30,000 a year, even though technically it was free. So I think helping families understand that and look at that and really look at it in context of debt, which is a whole another issue and is really misunderstood. I wrote a paper called The Real Cost of College, and it's on the website at my school. And to really break down some of these issues, because people don't understand debt. They don't understand free. They don't understand the cost of some of these things. So that's one. Another one, I think a third that I would highlight is really shifting priorities of higher ed, especially when you look at the flagships. What do they talk about? They talk about four characteristics. They all begin with the letter S, as I summarize them: size and sizzle and sports and status. And those become their benchmarks of success. And there's so much pressure for them to do that, to be effective and to win in sports, to have a status. They will, as we've seen, and I'm sure you've covered on your podcast, jerry-rigging the rankings in order to get higher rankings. Sure. The sizzle. I mean, LSU put in a multi-million-dollar lazy river. I mean, is that the good use of students' tuition? I don't know. Size seems to matter to them more than really the college experience for the undergraduate student, where they go to these campuses. They can't even find housing because they've grown so big and they can't provide for their students. So I think shifting priorities are a real concern for higher ed. And then probably the fourth and last one I'd highlight is there is a deepening across all levels of education, not just higher ed, but across all levels of education. People aren't demanding to get their money's worth. And I feel like we could solve the education problem in a heartbeat at all levels if people would just demand to get their money's worth. You know, if a campus, says, hey, classes are closed, students don't say, hey, I paid for that class, I need to get that material. No, they celebrate. If they get out early, they're thankful. If the test is easy, they're rejoicing. You know, it's just amazing. I mean, if I bought an iPad and it didn't work a third of the time, and some of the features I paid for didn't work, I'd be running up the Apple store and screaming and hollering and say, I want my money's worth.
Right.
Well, if we would do that for higher education, if we would demand our money's worth, we could change the whole system in a heartbeat. But unfortunately, that is becoming less and less. The people don't want that. They want the degree. They don't want the learning, but it's the learning that's going to prepare them for life.
No, well said.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, for our recommended resource for 222, I'm going to let Lisa describe our recommended resource of the week. Take it away, Lisa.
Sure. Our recommended resource this week is a Learning Differences virtual college fair that's going to be held on May 4th of this year. And it's put on by an institution called Go To College Fairs. And so what they are doing is they're focusing on opportunities for students who have IEPs, 504 plans, or other therapeutic supports or accommodations. And they say, that's about 20% of the high school population would fall into one of those categories. So they're going to talk a little bit more about post-secondary planning, what kinds of things that you need to look at when you're getting your IEPs and your 504s and those accommodations. And they're also going to talk about, some colleges that are particularly good at that and have special programs. So they do have a college matchmaking kind of program, which I think might be some marketing, but they will match you if they're going to ask you 5 questions, like what major you're interested in, what geographical area, what size of school, and a couple others. And then they'll give those colleges your information. Those colleges will probably reach out to you. So just know if you do that, you're probably going to hear from those colleges more than one time.
Lead generation. We call it lead generation.
But I think it would be really good. I know this used to be a real in-life college fair that would go around. And I know in Illinois they had it. And I was not able to go, but I talked to someone who did, and it was very well attended. So you can sign up, I think, starting in a couple of weeks at gotocollegefairs.swoogo.com. I'm assuming that's going to be in the show notes.
It is. And people need to sign up right away because it's April 28th today, and this is May 4th. So You've got 6 days. To hopefully you're listening to our episodes as soon as they come out every Thursday, which of course everybody does.
Of course they do. And this is on a Wednesday, and there are 2 sessions. There's one during the day from 11 to 1 Eastern, and there's one in the evening from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern.
So the last thing, Lisa, so what would be some of the learning differences? Like if your child has this, it would probably be a good fair for you to go to. What would you say?
I think if your child has any kind of learning difference, like let's say dyslexia, dyscalculia, attention deficit disorder, maybe kids with, autism or Asperger's disorder, processing disorders.
Speed.
Yeah, any other kind of thing that just you want to say okay, we really want to go to a place where people are going to be helpful so that this student can learn everything that they need to learn to their full potential. And
would you include ADD and ADHD in there as well?
Yeah. I thought I said that. I'm sorry.
You probably
but
did.
Yeah, definitely. You weren't paying attention.
Probably. Wouldn't be the first time.
But anyway, well, maybe I did and maybe who knows. But I just think and also they say if you have somebody who let's say they need to use a wheelchair. That's another person who I think would really benefit for this. Or you need to use a scooter, or you have a vision impairment, or you're hearing impaired. different schools are going to be relatively more or less accommodating. And I think this can help you figure out which ones are interested in doing that and how your needs are going to be best met.
Yeah. And I know a lot of times people will say, well, how do I know if a school is going to be good at serving my child with their learning difference? And go and ask them the tough questions, ask them the tough questions. So check it out. And we'll put the link in the show notes. So now return to my interview with Roger Parrott. I want to follow up on your first one. Is college worth it? Because I've seen the surveys, and I've seen almost a precipitous drop, particularly on the Republican side, of people saying, "Is college worth it?" as they answer those surveys. What is your theory of the genesis of that? What's caused that? Because it's definitely on the rise in the last decade.
Well, I think it has become political, and I think it's a kickback, especially from some who say, well, colleges is a kind of a bastion of liberal teaching, and we're going to indoctrinate students and a liberal teaching, so why should we go there? And I don't know if that's happening on campuses or not. It's sure not happening on my campus. That's not how we approach it, But I'm sure there are issues of that make people fearful, and they see the fringe stories. They don't see the whole of the institution, and they see symbols of various things that make them concerned. And I understand that, and I get that, but higher education has changed a lot. I mean, there was a day in higher education when we required Greek and Latin of everybody. We don't do that anymore. And there's one in our catalog where we required elocution. I can't even say it. I apologize. But it's just kind of amazing. So curriculum does change over time. But yeah, there is a concern that these institutions have become too liberal, and so we're not going to support that kind of environment, put our kids in that. And I think families need to make that choice. I think that's an important decision to make, but it's not a matter if college is not worth it or not. It's just a matter of which environment do you want to be in. Pick the environment that builds up the values you care about. One of the things that I encourage prospective families to look at when they're looking at college is to ask this question: are these the kind of people I would like to be like? And when you go on the campus tour, when you're walking through and they're showing you the buildings and they're bragging on their sports and they're bragging on their Nobel Prize laureates, and that's all great, although undergraduates will never get near them. But don't just be looking at that stuff. Be talking to the people and say, are these the kind of people I would like to be like? And I think that better answers that question of where they fit. And yeah, if that's a worldview that they're interested in that is more on the liberal side, then great, go to an institution like that. If they want one more on the conservative side, go to one like that, or one that's more middle of the road with a broader discussion. There are lots of those kind of institutions too. But I think that's kind of where that's getting pushed. It is political, unfortunately, but it's asking the wrong question.
No, well said. So you could think of this as a similar question, but I'm sure you could go in a different direction with it as well. I know you interact with a lot of presidents all around the country. You guys go to conferences and talk, and you have your friendships. What are the things that keep presidents up at night? What are the big issues, macro issues, concerns, topics? What comes to mind?
Well, again, beyond COVID, which has kept us all up at night,
Sure.
I have nightmares. Oh, man.
I know. When is it going to end?
When is it going to end? And the struggle, I feel very responsible for our students. And so to keep them safe is priority one. If people aren't safe, the rest doesn't matter. But I'd say several things. One is the assuring that higher education can stay affordable. And there are a lot of schools pricing out. And they've just reached the top, and they can't do it anymore. They can't go up any farther. And so, some of them do these tuition resets, which really doesn't save anybody money. What they do is they say, well, our tuition's $60,000. We're going to cut it to $30,000. And in the process, they cut everybody's scholarship by $30,000. So Nobody saved any money. They're just changing the sticker price. we have to be serious about real affordability. And that's a matter of good stewardship. How do you handle the dollars? It's not more money that's always going to solve the problem. How do you get good value out of that? And what is the student experience? That's the question, at least on my campus, we're always asking. How does this impact the student experience? And I think there are ways to keep college more affordable. Yes, it is expensive, and it's expensive because it's a people-dominated business. You have to have a lot of people to run an institution, and of course you got to have a lot of technology and those kinds of things as well. But it's the people costs that drive it. But at a lot of institutions, they are overburdened with people they probably don't need any longer, people who may be tenured forever and they can't get rid of, and so they carry those costs, and they pass all those costs on to the students. I mean, at my institution, we 3-4 years ago went through and said, okay, how do we right size this institution for what tomorrow looks like? And we made some changes, and we had to say goodbye to some friends. Now, that wasn't a matter of saying we've got to do this because we're financially in trouble. It was a matter of saying what's the best stewardship of our money for what students are paying. And because we're deep in the deep South, our costs are very low. And so we've got to make everything value out of what we got. So I think affordability is a big question. I think another big question is kind of being forced to shortcut academic quality. Our high schools, in many of them, are not preparing as well. And so colleges have had to pick up a lot of remedial work. And then if you press too hard, those students are not prepared for success at regular level college work. And if you press too hard, then they're going to drop out, and your school's going to suffer, et cetera, and your rankings will hurt for those who care about the rankings. And so there's this give and take pressure on academic quality to continue to lower the standards, which really concerns me. I think another one, you kind of touched on it earlier, is the constituency groups that are pushing politics or athletics really over academics or character. And you see that University of Nebraska has been through 2 presidents here in the last 5 or 6 years, and it's over tensions between the faculty have one position on their worldview, the legislature has a different position, the president's caught in the middle, and they're exploding. And I think that's one way to evaluate colleges. Look at what's happened in the presidency of any institution you're looking at to see where the tensions are, because that's where the tension point comes out. So I think that's a big one where schools are in trouble. I thought it was interesting when Baylor won the Sugar Bowl here a few days ago. I was so happy for Linda Livingston, who's the president there. I think Linda's done a terrific job at Baylor turning that around. But I remember a number of years ago interviewing the president of Baylor. He'd come for a conference we had here in Mississippi, and it was right after he'd gotten fired. And I asked him, I said, when you look back on it, what would you do differently? Or what would you see differently? And he said, I would have realized football's a lot more important than I thought it was. And football does drive a lot of these schools. Athletics drives a lot of these schools. Their decisions are made. But how does that impact the student experience? It doesn't. It's nice to have some school spirit about a team that wins if you're at Alabama. But, past that, what does it do to the individual student experience?
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, I'm really excited today because Lisa is going to be talking about UIC. And it's a school I don't know that much about, and I know it's a pretty prominent school. Lisa, so take it away.
Right. So UIC is University of Illinois at Chicago, and it is a college or university that is in downtown Chicago. It's the largest university in Chicago, and it is 1 mile from the Loop in Chicago. It's a very powerful school in terms of health sciences, but also it's really known as a school that changes people's economic trajectories and lives. And in fact, 1 out of 10 Chicagoans have gotten their bachelor's degree from UIC.
Wow.
So, just to think about how many Chicagoans there are.
Yeah.
So It's really a big school with a great alumni network, and it is located a mile south of the Loop, and it's sort of surrounded kind of by all the city. It does have a distinct campus feel that has three parts. There's the east part that is more traditional college-y looking. It has residence halls, and then the west side is where all the health sciences and the hospital buildings. So there's a couple of hospitals there that are very close. There's a lot of training that happens at, and then of course south of that is their sports, like the baseball field and things like that. It is it's in Little Italy and Greektown are the neighborhoods that are around it. And, it used to kind of be known as a bad neighborhood, I would say, when I first got to Chicago in the late 80s. Now I feel like I'd be pretty comfortable walking around there, maybe not at 2 a.m. It's so much of the South Loop of Chicago has really improved. It's very urban. There's lots of ethnic restaurants, and it's a very diverse community.
Yeah, the few things I know is that it's extremely racially diverse.
Yes.
And I know it was started as a pharmacy school, right? And so there's
You're stealing my thunder, man.
Oh, sorry. I don't have much more thunder left.
Okay, keep going. Keep going. See, let's just do it all.
I knew there were 30,000 people. It's huge, but I didn't know 1 out of every 10 Chicagoans went there.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about it is it's for such a big school, it seems like it's a really reputable school. It's got a lot of pre-professional programs, right? But I never get asked about it by people outside of the Midwest. Does that surprise you?
It kind of doesn't. It kind of doesn't, because I think even in Illinois, UIC is sort of like UC's little bratty sister or something like that.
Now you need to break those initials down, because I don't think people. So that's Illinois talk, Lisa.
Yeah, sorry. University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign is considered to be the flagship, and so people view that as more prestigious.
And that's the UIUC.
That's UIUC. This is UIC, and it's kind of considered it's easier to get into in some ways, but. I think if you are interested in, a career in the health sciences, for instance, or they have an excellent homeland security program, and not that many places have that, it's a stronger school than many schools, in Chicago and even in the country in general. So I feel like its reputation should be larger than it is. Especially
because people really do like to be in cities.
Right.
You know what I mean? So this is I'm kind of excited to learn more, because selling people on cities is usually not that hard. I mean, of course, not everybody wants that. Does it bleed into the city, or does it have a distinct campus feel?
Well, there is some campus, but it does, there's a part where the dorms are and where a lot of the undergraduate classes are. It is more encapsulated. But when you start going into the hospital area, that is sort of very mixed into the city. And, it's in the city, so it can't have acres and acres and acres all to itself. So,
of course.
The city is very close wherever you are. I think that one of the things that I think in the past historically has kept people from considering this is it's been known as a commuter school.
I was going to ask you that. How much is a commuter versus residential, that kind of thing, right?
So it's about 80% are commuters. Okay. But, that being said, there's a lot of apartments that are around the school, and they do have a center that is for commuters. And they're really trying to inculcate a community sense at UIC. And so they have a lot of activities, and they, kind of try to bring it in. It doesn't matter where you live. And, we're all going to participate, and they offer a lot of things. So I think that a lot of times once people get there, they don't feel like it's a suitcase school. They feel like people are more involved. And of course, a lot of people, they want to get involved in all the things that Chicago has to offer on the weekends or when they have time off.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to be quiet and let you kind of say, I know you've got all this great content ready.
That's okay.
So how would you say it, feels different than DePaul? Compare and contrast it to DePaul, because I think of DePaul as a city school in Chicago as well.
For me, DePaul is more spread out.
Mm-hmm.
DePaul is over several blocks, and it's not... there'll be a section of DePaul, a couple blocks over here, and then you go a block and there's no DePaul, and then there's more DePaul over there. I mean, UIC does have a distinct campus.
Okay.
Where where DePaul is more spread out. I
That's
think
helpful.
DePaul's neighborhood is a bit more residential also. So, where UIC is more in like the medical district. It's like the business district is not far. So more and more people are moving to the South Loop, but historically that hasn't been seen as a residential neighborhood quite as much.
That was good. That was helpful. All right, go do your thing. I just was so curious. I had those questions I had to get off my chest.
That's okay. I love me some questions. So, but anyway, as Mark mentioned, the University of Illinois started as the Chicago College of Pharmacy, and it was founded in 1859 and before the Civil War. But they quickly added on other health sciences schools. And so by 1913, they incorporated these schools. And so it was known as the College of Medicine, Dentistry, and Pharmacy. And the pharmacy school was the first pharmacy school west of the Allegheny Mountains. And it was really one of the forefront pioneers in laboratory instruction and research for pharmacy. In dentistry, they started making a lot of innovations at the dentistry school. They were the first school to have electric drills, folks. So I don't know if you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, but they got those going. And of course, they also have they have the first occupational therapy program in the country. So they're kind of a cornerstone of that profession, which is very important. So they eventually, following World War II, they had this, campus in the Loop, but then they moved part of it to Navy Pier. And now when you go to Chicago and you go to Navy Pier, it's like the biggest tourist attraction. There's a Ferris wheel and plays and restaurants and, you can walk. But back in World War II, see, my grandfather was actually stationed there during World War II. He did his Navy training.
Oh, wow. Your Chicago roots go deep.
He was barracked in the grand ballroom of Navy Pier, and they had no heat. He said he had never been so cold in his life. And he was from Pittsburgh, so just to give you a point of reference. But, can you imagine being out there on the lake, the wind just whipping through, no heat, with this thin blanket? But he loved Chicago, actually. He was there for a few years, and he said the people were just so nice to them. They, people would just see them walking down the street and say, hey, come over to my house for dinner. And they would give them dinner. Taxis would give them rides everywhere for free. They felt very taken care of there, except for the lack of heat. But so it was not like the nice place it was now. So they went in there and they used that till 1965. And UIC really expanded after World War II because of the GI Bill. So they started taking a lot of students in that weren't normally before going to school. Apparently, they used to call Navy Pier the Harvard on the Rocks. I'm not sure if they would call it that anymore. Then after the 1965, they kind of consolidated everything over to where the current campus is now, which is near Greektown in Little Italy, as I planned. And the campus is arranged in concentric rings, and they meant it to look like a drop of water. So if you look at it like from a drone view or above, it will look like that. And so, they combined it all into the University of Illinois at Chicago in 1982. So they consolidated the medical campus, the circle campus, which is why they call it, the circle campus, because it looks like a circle. And it all went together, and it's been just growing ever since. They keep adding things. They keep adding dorms. They're adding new classroom buildings. I saw an info session. They're adding, this is sort of the opposite of the way many schools are going, but they added a lecture hall that seats 900 students.
Whoa.
So, that might be pre-COVID. So that means seats like 12 students now. But, they added a lot of innovation buildings. And then in 2019, they acquired the John Marshall Law School. And so they incorporated that. And now it's the UIC School of Law. So they have it's just a huge program. They have lots of programs, lots of things to study. And it's just kind of an educational powerhouse in Chicago. Questions, thoughts?
Well, one thing I wanted to say is, and I should have come prepared, but we've had this spotlight came from a request. We had a request, you've done Northwestern, you've done Chicago, but what about UIC and Illinois State? So, so I wanted to sorry, I can't mention your name, but so we know there's some interest out there. And
yeah.
And the more you talk about it, the more I understand why. Do you have a sense of their admission, both their criteria, what they use to determine, and their sort of degree of selectivity?
Right. Well, it kind of depends because, if you're just applying to the general school, then the acceptance rate is about 73%. And test scores, you're looking at, reading scores on the SAT between 510 and 610, and math scores between 520 and 640. So if you're just applying to the general thing, I think they will accept a wide range of students, but there are some very specialized programs at UIC called the GPPA programs, which are sort of like they have a Bachelor of Science in nursing where you can go through and get that. They have, you can get your Doctor of Medicine. You can become a dentist. It's like one of those guaranteed admission programs. And those programs are incredibly selective. They also have it. They have it for all the medical professions: pharmacy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, nutrition, kinesiology. Nursing is another huge one. And of course, medicine, but they also now are doing that with the law school. So those programs have a different admission rate. For instance, for the medicine one, so you could go like combined degree and get your MD, that's an 8% admission rate. For dentistry applicants, you're getting your, going all the way through with that, is 13%. Nursing applicants was 6%. I mean, it is a tough school to get into for nursing. So you kind of have to look at that and say, like, if you're going to go for those things, you probably got to bring your A game literally to that school.
So a lot of those programs you're talking about are direct admits.
Yes.
Direct admit programs. But it seems like there's a fairly large professional graduate school component. Do you know the numbers for like how many students are an undergraduate versus graduate?
They have 34,000 undergraduates.
Yeah, so that's pretty big.
It's pretty big. And then they have about 15,000 graduate students. So it's very
big both ways.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they do a lot of graduate training there as well.
What criteria are they using on the undergraduate side for determining who they admit? Are they just doing formulaic or guaranteed admissions, what I call admissions by the numbers, where it's just test score GPA?
No, it is a more of a holistic process. They look at essays, they look at your record, they test. It's test optional right now, as most places are. Although I think they said like over 80% of their applicants submitted test scores this year. So
that's high.
Yeah. And so I think, like I said, it really is very dependent. Now, if you apply to any of these GPPA programs, these direct admit programs, you're going to have to write a lot more essays.
Sure. And
do a lot more work. And, I would say also they have a really strong honors college, and that has more essays, and it's a separate application process.
That's pretty cool. Friends, this concludes part 1 of my discussion with Lisa. Next week, we will resume our final part.
Next week in the news, the college admission process is completely broken. An article by Jeffrey Slingo of The Atlantic. Our question from a listener is, Lisa, what are your thoughts about the recent article in The Atlantic entitled, Why Are Teens So Sad? Part 2 of 2. Our interview was with Roger Parrott, the president of Belhaven University in Jackson, Mississippi, on what are the major trends impacting higher education, and that is part 2 of 2. And our college spotlight is the final part 2 of 2, of the University of Illinois in Chicago, and that is UIC.
And friends, if there's only one thing you ever remember from this podcast 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, I want it to be this. College is not a prize to be won, but a match to be made. And it's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there. See you next week, friends.
Take care, everybody.
Like Dave says, same bat time, same bat channel.
Same bat channel.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. David Williams and Dr. Lisa Ruff. Our sound engineer who fixes all of our many errors is Nemanja Motvich. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Dalianas Dimitru. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.